On Innovators Journal today, we are very excited to have Professor Bonthron, a professor at the University of San Francisco teaching MBA and master level classes in entrepreneurship. He's led startups, guided corporate strategies, and now is helping guide the next level of founders. So first, welcome, Professor. How are you today?
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Nice. So let's keep things off easy. So just tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe something that people wouldn't know much about you.
Well, I'm one of those people who's a pretty open book, so I tend not to keep too much of myself terribly private. And I don't know if that's good or bad. That just it is what it is. In the context of this call and what we're going to talk about, it's probably interesting to share that my father was a college professor as well.
Oh, wow.
So back when I was a young man, they had go to work with your mom or dad day, and I would sit in the back of a 400 level mechanical engineering vibrations course at Illinois Institute of Technology. So I'm quite sure my passion for teaching and universities and all of that is probably derived from some pretty early imprinting.
Mm. And just out of curiosity, is your father your role model and who you look up to?
Oh, one of them,
One
yeah.
of them.
I found in growing up that I had one dad and I had about eight or nine sort of dads,
Mm.
um, just people, the male role models that
Yeah.
provided me, some great examples of how to be. It might have been values-based, career-based, humor-based. Just there were a small group of them, and they're older now. And one of the things I make sure I do is take the opportunity to tell them. And it's usually a bit overwhelming when I do share that, but I don't care. I think
Yeah.
it's important to let them know that they've had that big of an impact on my life. But certainly my own father is
Yeah.
one of my key role models.
That's very amazing to hear. And you have become a very big person, so it's it's clear to see that they had a big impact on your life as well.
Yeah, well, and I'm 6'7", so
Oh,
I'm
wow. Also the
literally big
genes.
too, literally
Yeah.
big.
Wow. That's very cool. Okay, so just tell us about your career. What did you major in? What did you study, or what you did growing up?
Yeah, sure. I'll do the short version, and you can dig where appropriate. But yeah, I would say as a young man about your age, I was definitely an athlete and a nerd, and that made me a very interesting combo because I hung out in the math lab, which had an adjunct computer lab attached to it, and I did tons of programming, and I loved computers. This was in the era of Ohio Scientific and 8-inch floppy disks, and I know you know what those are. But and also I was a basketball player at six
Oh,
foot
wow.
seven,
Yeah.
and coming from the Midwest, I really didn't have much of a choice. So it was always a very interesting combination because I knew the athletic kids and I had that drive and desire to succeed in basketball, which I did.
Yeah.
But I also loved science and I loved programming. And like I said, I was a bona fide nerd. So interesting combo that I was growing up.
Yeah. That's a really nice combo because it's good to be athletic as well as, having that smartness in you as well.
Yeah, well, and the passion. Just
Yeah.
my daughter just graduated from UCLA, and she changed her major 4 or 5 times. And at one
Mm.
point, her major required a lot of computer science, and I was very
Oh.
excited for that. And it just didn't really work for her. And there was this pivotal conversation where she said, "But Dad, I just don't like programming." And I couldn't believe that. I'm like, how can someone not like programming? It's so cool and
Yeah.
elegant, and you can manipulate this machine to do what you want and show what you want. But it didn't work out for her. So
Mm.
yeah, but proud to be a nerd, and it has definitely shaped what I am and how I understand things today. I think a technical background can be amazing. Some of my mentors, others we may get into in strategy and in business, were not at all. But I think it's a pretty cool background.
Yeah. And you said that, and you mentioned that you were very the kind of scientific, right? And you started your career in engineering, but then
Correct.
what happened after your engineering
Yeah, it's a
stage
great
left?
question. I went for an interview with Hewlett Packard at their Boise, Idaho disk drive division. And I'll never forget it because it was, I think, the second or third airplane flight of my life. And I remember being in the facility with the gentleman who would be my manager if I accepted the offer. And he showed me what would be my workbench and the oscilloscope that was on it. And I think there was even a soldering iron there. And it was just a very classic engineer environment. And I describe it as, he looked the other direction, and when he turned around, there was a hole in the wall the shape of me because I ran as fast as I could
Oh
from
wow.
that. And because for me, and I don't think in the end this was correct, but at that point in my life, I felt that I wanted a job, I wanted a career that was much more about people,
Oh,
interacting
okay.
with people, opportunity to lead people, opportunity to work hard and be rewarded for that, but mainly just that human interaction. And so I had some interviews with a firm called Arthur Andersen, who had a management information consulting division, which became Andersen Consulting, which is now Accenture. And I just thought that was much more appealing because it seemed like I'd be dealing with people much, much more. And I
Yeah.
don't like stereotyping engineers that way. I think it's too simple and it's not true. And of course, many engineers have grown to be amazing leaders, of
Yeah.
business, of all sorts of things. But at that point, when I was a not very experienced 18-year-old, no, I would have been older than that, 21-year-old. That's how I felt.
Hmm. I mean that's definitely fair, right? I mean, even for me, I definitely like connecting and talking to people, just like how I'm doing in this podcast. So
Clearly,
yeah, and I definitely
here we sit on
relate
your
with what you're saying.
podcast.
Exactly, yeah. So just look at your LinkedIn. You've worked at so many different companies, right? And this includes many leadership positions, such as at Capgemini, uh, and high executive roles at Microsoft and Salesforce. So how did these different leadership roles play a role in who you are today? And what are some of the biggest takeaways that you learned at your time at these companies?
Oh my. Well, um, that's a great question. I mean, let's just start with the showy one that everybody knows, and that's Salesforce. I mean, my
Yeah.
my time at Salesforce was fantastic. A lot of companies on Earth will claim to be driven by culture, claim to be mission driven, and I wouldn't argue with them that they're not to some level. But Salesforce truly, truly is. And the saying we used at Salesforce all the time was culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so the
Mm.
culture at Salesforce was so important to live the values, to know the values, to understand the values.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
To live the values, to know the values, to understand the values. And it was because it was so strong, we were able to bring it into our everyday work.
Oh,
I
okay.
think values or a strong mission are most powerful when you can use them to make a decision. You come to a fork in the road, you have to go right or left, and the values or the culture of the company guides you. That's when it's
Oh,
really working. And that was Salesforce. And the second thing about Salesforce that was incredible was just the anticipated and expected growth. If you brought something to Mark Benioff that had a 100 or 200 million dollar outcome, you would get told to go back and make it 500 or 800 or a billion. And Salesforce was always up and to the right. And there was just so much growth and so much possibility. It really affected the way you thought about your work.
Oh, okay. So Salesforce was like a big stepping stone for you. I mean, not just in its growth, but like it also influenced you to go help, advise more businesses and other companies as well.
I think, well, for me, one of the things, just because of the culture of Salesforce, it was a place for me to flex my entrepreneurial muscles
Mm, yeah.
in a huge way. So my claim to fame, my claim to fame at Salesforce was to create a startup, which was in effect a joint venture funded by Ford and Salesforce Ventures called
Oh, okay.
Visor, where we took the capabilities of Salesforce, but put a skin on top and brought all those great capabilities to tradespeople, plumbers, electricians, landscapers, people like that. And it was, a classic corporate venture capital, bringing two large companies together. So it was not easy to do, as opposed to just starting a startup, but there's still plenty to learn. And, I really, really got a lot out of that. Extremely proud the day that we launched it on CNBC. It was
Mm.
Mark Benioff on one half of the screen, Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, on the other
Oh,
half
wow.
of the screen, and Jim Cramer, interviewing them and talking about what Visor was and would be.
Mm. And is this
And
Salesforce? Oh,
so
yeah, go
that
ahead.
was a pretty proud moment. No,
Okay.
please.
Okay. And is this Salesforce era before your teaching role at USF, or is this after?
No, no.
Way before?
I've been a professor at USF for 23 years now. So
Mm.
it's the longest position or job or role, whatever you want to call it, that I've held in my life. So
Oh,
it's
wow.
been a constant. It goes all the way back to, uh, I think it was 2002 when I
Mm.
started. So.
Nice. And you mentioned that you like learned a lot of lessons and a lot of different advice from Salesforce. And is this some of the stuff that you teach your students at USF?
Well, what I will say about uh, so my what I am at USF is what we call an adjunct professor, and
Adjunct professor.
I
Okay.
always thought adjunct had some really cool meaning. Uh,
Mm.
Maybe it meant you were special or something like that. What we know it to mean is part time. Uh, but one day, unfortunately, I took the chance to look up in Latin what adjunct actually means, and it translates literally to not a part of. So,
Oh,
on the one
okay.
hand, you get to have a full, vibrant, robust career and be a professor. But what you don't get is a lot of the interactions on
Mm.
campus and being a part of the professorial community. And you certainly
Oh,
don't do any research, which drives a lot of professors'
yeah.
success and their passion in the world. Um, but what you get being an adjunct professor is the ability to bring amazing stories and real-time stories and real-time context into the classroom. So
Mm.
there were times when I would kick off class by saying, so I met with Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford this week,
Oh, oh, wow.
and kind of captures the student's
Yeah.
attention. And then just you're teaching, in business, you're in effect teaching people how to succeed in the business world, right? Unless they choose a research career, they're all heading into the business world, or all so much of your real experience, been there, done that, and you can bring it through stories. Excuse me. You can
Mm.
bring it through stories, and that's of course the best way to teach, to uh, advance a thought, is to be able to share a story with someone
Yeah.
as you go through it. So that's, I think, what makes adjunct professors very unique and successful. There's probably an economic aspect to it too. You don't get paid a lot of money as an adjunct professor. So you don't do it for the money. So you do it because you love it. And so
Yeah.
you never, I would like to hope students will never have an adjunct faculty.
Mm. But it's that passion that keeps driving you to be an adjunct professor. And it's that passion that keeps driving you to still be the adjunct professor, like, as
Yeah,
you mentioned before. Yeah. And I mean,
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I would sit straight up if I heard that my professor met the CEO of Ford. I mean, that alone is a pretty impressive story to hear. I wish one day that I
Right.
would also be able to hear that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one example of a story. And
Yeah.
the others were, I was still teaching when I did a corporate strategy for a company in Santa Rosa called Keysight as they were going public. And I was able to relay, of course, non-confidential, but stories and experiences from that directly into the class. And so just, all those sorts of real experiences from the real business world, and it just really, I think, brings a lot to the classroom.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Wow, you have such a dynamic career across, in your teaching
Thank you.
role and across all these companies. And now I just want to dig into, the heart of your work, entrepreneurship itself. So let's just spend some time talking about what it really takes to build and grow a successful startup today, right? With decades of experience in strategy consulting and, your leadership in almost four startups, what mistakes do you repeatedly
Oh,
see many of these
oh,
early stage founders make?
you had to bring up the M word, didn't you? Mistakes.
Mistakes. See, I mean, that's the big definition of a
Yeah,
startup. Always mistakes.
it is. I think what makes an entrepreneur and any leader really most successful is your ability to make a mistake and
Yeah.
move on from it quickly, right? Learn and not dwell on it. And I wouldn't say that I'm perfect at that, right? By any measure. But that is certainly how I personify, uh, leaders in the space. And most are quite open about, yeah, I completely screwed that up. I spend a lot of time listening to the Andreessen Horowitz A16Z podcasts because I have a lot of respect for that venture firm and the journey they've been on. And when they're interviewing Andreessen and Horowitz, they talk about all the time about huge mistakes they made or things they
Mm.
missed. But the same for my tenure at Salesforce, same for my time at Capgemini. In all of them, big mistakes made, big things missed, which is another form of a mistake.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Made, big things missed, which is another form of a mistake. But I think the ability to recover from that very, very quickly, in the startup world, you might formally call that a pivot if necessary, or just not let that emotional baggage get you down. I think, that might be it. It really allows
Yeah.
people who are successful in the startup world to continue forward. But you specifically asked, as a way of helping others learn, what are some of the big mistakes that I have seen made repeatedly? Well, I'll tell you that it's interesting. The biggest mistake I have seen in my career as a teacher certainly has been simple, and that's not doing it.
I don't. Okay.
My There are many times where my students would come up with powerful business ideas and develop them reasonably well, in an academic construct. And then a year or 2 or 3 years later, along comes another startup that does that and kills it.
Mm.
There is a startup, or was, I'm not sure if it's still with us or how successful, but I believe it was called Rent a Runway. And the idea
That's one.
was that young women in particular, or not young women, often need a formal dress just to wear it once. And they're very, very
Oh yeah.
expensive for prom or for a special wedding or something like that. And so the idea was, why buy that? Instead, maybe you can rent that. And I
Exactly.
had two young women in my class long time ago, long before Runway was created, and they came up with that idea. We had a judging competition at the end of the semester, some pretty cool people judging, and everyone was so excited. And the constant feedback was, "You should do this. This is
Mhm.
compelling. No one is doing it, and it's really neat." And they did not. So
Exactly.
that story is repeated over and over and over in my
Yeah.
personal history of having seen students do it. And
Mhm.
sometimes there's things that the university can do to help with that. I think USF in particular is behind in terms of offering an accelerator or incubator on campus to help students, and also a venture fund, which I'm trying to start at the University of San Francisco. And when you have that, sometimes the students will start the business because they just know they have a little help, something to
Mhm.
push them along. I used to say, students coming out of college that are thinking of starting a business, they don't need a lot of money, but they just need enough to not take another job. And if you can give them
Yeah.
some, then maybe they'll pursue that passion.
Okay. Yeah. And I've recently heard like a saying where the graveyard is the place where there's the most amount of billion-dollar ideas because there lies so many people who have these
Yeah,
billion-dollar ideas, but they never go and do them, right?
right.
And it just lies there. And that's
That's
something
right.
that I,
And that's the definition, I think, again, of a true entrepreneur. But
yeah,
cultures also drive that. The Silicon Valley culture.
yeah,
If you live in Silicon Valley and you haven't, and you're tech or close to it, and you haven't worked at a startup, there's kind of something wrong with you, right? Or I
yeah,
always think about students at Stanford. I'm sure in some colleges it's less true or more true, but if you're a Stanford student and you haven't done a startup, that's crazy. And so
exactly.
at the University of San Francisco, USF, that's what myself and Professor Cromwell, Professor Knies, the provost, and others, we're trying to create that culture to make it normal, to make it expected, to be able to bring resources to students more effectively and faster so that they can see a path to success and a way to get over those first few speed bumps and actually give it a try.
Yeah. And to remove the hesitant attitude, maybe I don't have enough resources. What if I fail? Just go do it. It's probably going to be a success.
Right. And there are always, I, I I love that we're talking about sort of the soft middle, right? So
Yeah.
there's certain entrepreneurs, I think of a couple that came like from the University of Illinois, Larry Ellison, right? The CTO, I believe, at Oracle now, and obviously founder and CEO of Oracle for a long, long time. A guy like that or a guy like Mark Benioff, they're probably always going to be an entrepreneur, right? So
Yeah.
that was, kind of written. Now, they had normal jobs too. In fact, Benioff was a salesperson at Oracle for a long, long time, a very successful one. But that was probably already written. And then there's certainly a chunk of the population that will never do it, right?
Yeah.
But there's this big middle, and those people, and whether, we talk about tech a lot. This is Silicon Valley, right? But, gentleman who lives down the street from me has a thriving electrical contractor business,
Oh, wow.
like the people that my Ford and Salesforce startup was built to serve. I mean, he's very entrepreneurial, right?
Mm.
So it isn't necessarily just a tech thing. And the more we can do as a nation, as a culture, to help that middle, the people that might do it or might not, construct our laws in such a way, our financing capabilities in such a way that people have access to capital. There's countries in the world I'm sure someone can fact check this that I'm right or wrong, but I spent years in Australia. And the story as I tell it, let's hope it's a fact, is that if you are part of a bankruptcy as a board member or a executive of the company, you're forbidden by law from being an executive or a board member for a period of
Oh,
time. And when you have things like that in place, where there's shame, I have personally bankrupted three companies. Yeah, three, right? And it in Silicon Valley, so what, right? Everybody
yeah,
has a startup or two, maybe not three, but that they have led or been a senior part of that has failed, right? And it's just
yeah,
how it goes. So being able to correct and make that okay, and again, having that culture where this is expected and normal, I think that drives innovation, that drives the economy, and is a huge part of the success, certainly that we see in Silicon Valley, in California, and in the United States, which really makes us all three special.
yeah. And I completely agree with that 100%.
Well,
Nice.
here you are at the beginning of
Exactly,
your ability to do this. So
yeah,
yeah,
and just keep going. And you have also advised these early stage ventures and supported fundraising startups for venture capital firms. And just fix me if I'm wrong, but I believe that these firms are the kind of a big role in startup growth, as they provide the necessary funding and capital. So what exactly do these firms look for in a business to make sure that it would succeed and worth the investment?
well, I'm going to give you a little sideways answer on this, and I'm going to tell you a story about a friend of mine, Joe. Um, Joe has a med tech startup, and I probably shouldn't share exact ownership, but he has a partner, and they basically share the company, the two of them, and that's it. They've never taken venture money. They don't have offices. They don't spend a lot, etc. They're very judicious, very thoughtful. They have a few staff, very limited numbers of them. If this person, we'll call Joe, sells his med tech company for $30 million, for 40 million, let's say $40 million, well, he gets $20 million of it. As soon as you start accepting money from others, people generally know this, right? Then you're diluting.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Others, people generally know this, right? Then you're diluting the business, etc. So
Yeah.
it is very normal, and you even phrase the question this way, to say, get idea, maybe build rough product, go out and raise money. And I think there's an opportunity for almost all investors to be much more thoughtful than that.
Oh,
Certainly, if you have to scale a business fast, like you're early in a category, or you're B2C to consumer, and you have to pour money into marketing to grow quickly, et cetera, then there's a need for that capital. But I think too often, particularly with young people, they just, and in the Valley, they just have this accepted order of things, come up with idea, maybe build rough prototype, go raise money. And I think that always should be questioned and challenged.
and I'm just wondering, then this capital, this need for funding, it's not fully necessary in order to grow a business, at its early stages, right? Maybe it could go into the market, I guess kind of do well, and then they can go fundraise or
The more you can
maybe
do on
later
your
on.
own, the better, right? And
Mm.
and there should always be a need or a reason when a young entrepreneur is looking to raise capital. Now, I cited one before. Sometimes you just need an income. And
Yeah,
so I said, but that's one of the advantages to being a young entrepreneur is that hopefully that's not a lot. And so,
yeah.
you can live at home, you can share a couch, all that classic sort of stuff, and just have enough money to get by and pursue your passion. It's known that Silicon Valley is has one of the highest percentage of dual income families in the country. And one
Oh,
of the
okay.
things that allows a family to do, if the partners that run the family, mom, dad, whichever, are both working and one wants to take a risk, well, then maybe you can still pay the mortgage. You can, still provide for the family, etc. If you're the sole breadwinner and you have an idea, that changes the risk equation, and may make it more difficult for you to want to pursue an entrepreneurial venture. So but again, I think that's part of the reason. It's one of the many reasons that being an entrepreneur is the purview of the young. And that's because, they tend not to have two kids in private school saving for college
Exactly.
and a mortgage. So
Yeah. And it's less
yeah,
hassle, right? You have more freedom to do more risk and not
that's right.
expect that failure, that weight of the
But
failure on your
even
shoulders.
but even beyond that, yes, as you said,
Yeah.
right? You don't worry about failing so much. And you also don't have the models of how the world works built into your brain yet. And they're
Yeah.
they're not so tight. And it's easier, I think, for a young entrepreneur to say, well, why not? Or
Yeah, exactly.
I don't care if it's always worked that way. We're going to do it
Yeah.
this way. And there's, certainly a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah. And also tying back, that's exactly one good reason on why, young entrepreneurs should put away that hesitant attitude and just go do it, like you mentioned before.
Yes,
Just go start, just go do something. Instead
100%.
of
I've
waiting.
heard of programs, and I don't want to misquote exactly whom it was, but I believe it's one of the programs available for aspiring startups in the Valley, I think at Stanford, and they'll pick a set of a cohort of 5 or 6 businesses to start this program. And in their first meeting, the leader of the program says, "All right, you got a week to go get 3 customers," and kind of literally walks out of the room, right? And that's something I always tried to bring to my teaching a lot. So, because there is an entire body of thought that says you can't really teach entrepreneurship, right? It's just it
Yeah.
has to be lived, it has to be done. But you could maybe make the same argument for medicine or something like that, where it's really the experience of doing it is what really teaches you. But one of the things I always brought into my classes was, okay, this week your homework is to go talk to 3 customers. And I remember a time I had one business in my MSEI program at University of San Francisco, Masters of Science in Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And we were also pushing design thinking. So using ethnographic ways to understand how people would use a product or how the product would solve a problem in their life. So the idea for this business was to send out single-use balloons to people. So you could like Amazon mail order a whole big bouquet of balloons because it's kind of hard to get balloons. And then it would
Yeah.
have a little device and you just push a button and the balloon would inflate. That was the idea. So they went to the party store in Daly City and interviewed people carrying balloons out of the party store, watch them stuff those balloons into their car, struggle to do that, the balloons blowing away, all this sort of stuff, and use that context to understand people's challenge. That was, the proverbial A plus effort that they did, but just always encouraging the students or the entrepreneur to go out and talk to real customers and just be with them, whether it's the Stanford
Yeah.
example I shared or the balloon guys. It's so important, especially it scares me in an academic environment that people think they can learn how to do a startup, do entrepreneurship inside a classroom, because you can't.
Yeah. I completely agree with that as well. And just switching gears, I've recently I mean not recently, a couple years ago, I've attended the Berkeley Business Academy of Youth program for business and entrepreneurship. And I basically gave a pitch about an idea that I had. And these pitches to VC, and I believe that these pitches, for example, to venture capitalists and other groups are pretty essential to get your business and your idea out in the market. And you've led the USS International Business Plan Competition, which was a huge success. So, what differentiates a pitch that stands out to investors and judges from one that just falls flat?
Pain, pain.
Pain.
Have you clearly identified an easy to understand enormous pain?
Mm,
Too often a business idea or entrepreneurial idea is a vitamin, not an aspirin. And that's
okay.
an incredibly important discipline. The more you can address something that is very real, and think of the story of Uber, we won't recount that here, but my God, taxis were horrible to deal with.
Oh,
Every human being on earth felt that way. And along came this idea to just do it different and really, really make it better. Easy to understand, compelling in terms of the size of market, and just really digging into that pain. I think when you give a pitch, there's all the other things that matter, some understanding of unit economics, some understanding of the economics of your business. You can't run through a spreadsheet in an elevator pitch. So, it's just the highlights. But I'll often go with just the acronym TTM, team, technology, market. Is it the
okay.
right team? Is it the right tech? And is it the right market? And all of that comes after you've identified a clear, identifiable, easy to understand problem that you are addressing.
I've heard, for example, like writing essays relate to your audience, and I think that could be applied in this situation as well, right? Just to relate to the market. What is the biggest thing, the biggest need in the market right now? And if you can successfully kind of pull everything together.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Successfully kind of pull everything together and address, what's missing, then it should be about like almost a hit.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's, I think you're adding a little to it, like, what's happening in the world, right? And in the context of where things are today and where things are going, right? Are you addressing, because the best ideas, of course, are things that consumers don't know they need
Yeah.
yet, right? But those are often done at the wrong time. Sometimes they're done at the right time. But the history of startups is full of examples where an idea had been done, but it just was too early, something like that.
Mhm.
So you got to be in touch with what's happening in the world. You have to understand the market dynamics today. But at the end of the day, is it easy to understand and is it a huge, huge pain? Don't be a vitamin, be an aspirin.
That makes sense. It's very good to hear. Okay. So stepping away directly, from entrepreneurship, uh, if a student or an early founder came to you with an idea, like a very hit idea, do you have like an exact process or a process that you would recommend for the first 100 days to maximize the growth of their company or their learning?
Yeah, well, yeah, I do. And this is part of what myself and Sean Calhoun and Jonathan Cromwell are bringing to the University of San Francisco. It's this idea of, picking cohorts, putting them in an accelerator, and then what do you do with them? What's the process, et cetera? And what I'll share, what we probably will deal with at the University of San Francisco is more early stage. But to me, there is a really great model out there that I don't know how famous it is, but it's called the traction gap. And it is brought to the world in a book written by a guy named Bruce Cleveland, who is a part of Wildcat Ventures, where my former partner and friend Jeffrey Moore was also a venture capitalist. And in Bruce's book, he lays out a very simple model for how to think about, is there an adequate category? How do you bring, then what's the next step? Getting a minimum viable product to market, et cetera, which is usually fairly straightforward for a team to do. And what Bruce and team have added to this and brought to the world is this concept of the traction gap. And that's the go-to-market period, where you get minimum viable revenue, where you get some repeatability, where you're actually able to address how to bring your product to market. And once you succeed with that, then you go to scale. And that, I think, this is not accurate to say, but relatively straightforward. So the idea being, it's that go-to-market strategy in the middle that's difficult. Now, your question said first 100 days or so. I think the first 100 days is really about the minimum viable product, getting product market fit, proving you have the tech chops or can access them to build what needs to be built. And yeah, really just that that deep understanding of the customer. If you have the tech chops, you have that deep understanding of the customer, you should be able to get product market fit. And that's what everybody is seeking. Any of those missing. What I'm adding is sort of the next phase beyond that, and keep an eye to that once you have that product, then it's about how you think about your go-to-market strategy that will define whether you're successful or not.
Hmm. And going back to our conversation about, these pitches, we talked about the attraction to the VCs in the audience, right? And I think that can be applied here as well. I think the biggest thing is being attracted to your customer, because the customer is what drives your MVP to your minimum viable product to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So if you can clearly identify.
Yes, it drives, it proves that you have product market fit, right? So you create an MVP. So what, right? Is there a big, passionate market out there that is willing to purchase that product or service that you've devised, right?
Exactly.
And think that's what's really critical to prove up front. With cloud computing, with generative AI, getting to a minimum viable product is so much easier and so much less expensive than it used to be. So there's very few excuses left for not actually nailing it, on the MVP front. But still, that hasn't really changed, right? How do you get to that as quickly as you can and prove to the world that you have something special?
Yeah. I mean, and then now is the time, and as you mentioned before, do it, right? Now is the time to actually just go do it, because you have all the available resources, unlike before, before AI, before the internet was a thing. Now is the best time to go and highest chance of succeeding. I mean, if you do everything right, per se.
That's right. Or, you're going to make mistakes, so don't worry about doing everything right. But look, every time is the right time to do it. You think about startups that were successful in 2003, and they're laughable now, right? Because the world's moved on so far. So yes, generative AI is making it easier to do startups in many cases. Cloud computing was a huge breakthrough. I remember in 2001 working for a startup in San Francisco in a grungy building right near the Hall of Justice and the End Up, if you know that nightclub. I hope you don't.
I don't.
And we went and bought a Sun Spark server for, I think, $90,000. And it sat in the office behind our chief financial officer, Bill. I mean, that's laughable today. And that was, that was the last technical revolution. We had SaaS, then we had cloud, that really impacted startups in terms of their ability to get going very, very quickly. And now I think it's generative AI, and beyond just the ability to do whatever you're doing, just beyond the ability to do whatever you're doing faster, right? There's so much more to it. Just the ability to address problems and address pains in ways that have never been thought of before and never been tried. Many of us call that term it AI first.
Yeah, yeah.
And these are startups that are built, with the idea of utilizing generative AI to solve problems. And they're going to have a huge advantage over companies that don't think that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with that as well. And in the next 20 years, I'm pretty excited to see what new innovations come out to, improve this process and streamline
It will
everything.
never stop.
It'll never
So
stop,
pay attention.
exactly. Exactly. Agree with that. Wow. You shared so much powerful advice, Professor, and I don't know how to thank you enough for being on the podcast today
I
and
can tell you
helping.
exactly how you can thank me. Go
Go
do
ahead.
something enormous.
Exactly. I completely agree with that.
And when you find someone to do it with, then that's the right time.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship can be lonely. And if you find someone who feels like the right partner, go for it and do something big. And let me watch from the grandstands and applaud for you.
At the finish line. Yeah. And
You
just, I
got it.
mean, just like Nike says, just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Thank you so much, Professor, for being with us here today.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Okay. Thank you. Good luck.